Lewis Hamilton finally speaks out against Mercedes and Toto Wolff. Stay tuned until the end to uncover what might signal the downfall of Mercedes in Formula One. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. 4 months on end, Lewis Hamilton endured in silence, his public demeanor carefully curated to mask the emotional disintegration occurring behind the scenes. Outwardly, he appeared unbothered, posting stylized photos, sharing enigmatic captions, giving interviews filled with generic optimism and restrained professionalism. To the media, he remained polished and composed. To his fans, he radiated calm, control, and a sense of purpose. But privately, within the confines of his inner circle, he was anything but serene. Beneath the surface was a man carefully calculating, meticulously remembering every slight, every dismissed suggestion, every strategic shift that excluded him. He wasn't just frustrated, he was betrayed. Every question he answered with a diplomatic nod was silently recorded in his mind. Every platitude he received from the team fed the fire. He wasn't simply waiting for the right moment to speak, he was preparing to make sure no one would forget what he had to say once he finally did. That moment came not in front of the cameras, not on a podium, not in the orchestrated chaos of a race weekend, but behind closed doors in the heart of Monte Carlo. It was a gathering billed as a low-key debrief, a confidential post-season sit-down meant to clear the air and lay the groundwork for the next chapter. But it became something else entirely, an event that will be remembered as a turning point not just in Hamilton's relationship with Mercedes, but in the entire power dynamic within the team. According to several individuals present, the tone of the room shifted instantaneously when he entered. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't making small talk. There were no greetings, no jokes, no handshake pauses. He sat down, glanced around, and began to speak with a conviction that made it impossible to look away. The room went still. And then came nearly 3 hours of uninterrupted truth. He didn't shout. There was no theatrical anger. His delivery was almost unervingly composed, measured, articulate, surgical in its precision. He spoke not from a place of rage, but from one of clarity. A clarity that had been forged through months of observation, meticulous documentation, and private conversations that left him more disillusioned with each passing week. He began by reflecting on the deep bond that once existed between him and the team, the trust that had propelled them to historic heights. He reminded them of the sacrifices, the championship nights, the cold testing mornings, the countless hours in the simulator. Then he pivoted. Slowly, deliberately, he dismantled the facade. He laid bare the erosion of transparency, the sidelining of his input, the subtle but steady dismantling of his influence. Hamilton described how, early in the 2023 season, he began noticing patterns that couldn't be ignored. Debrief sessions felt rushed, technical briefings became superficial, strategic decisions were made without his consultation. He wasn't being included, he was being managed. His role, once central, had been reduced to that of a figurehead, useful for branding, but increasingly irrelevant in the engineering process. And when he attempted to raise these concerns internally, he was met with vague reassurances and dismissive platitudes. "We're evolving," they told him. "You're still our guy," they insisted. But behind the words, their actions told a different story. Then came the specifics. The violations he said were deliberate, repeated, and in direct contradiction to his contract. Hamilton detailed how telemetry data that was supposed to be shared equally between both drivers had been filtered. He explained how he would receive key performance data hours after his teammate George Russell had already acted on it. On more than one occasion, entire segments were marked as awaiting validation or under review. Yet, curiously, Russell would appear in interviews casually discussing adjustments based on those very data points. It wasn't just an oversight, it was a strategy, and he knew it. He spoke of instances when internal emails were sent to select engineering staff with technical notes not copied to him. He referenced simulation setups that favored Russell's driving profile and explained how development direction quietly shifted towards setups that disadvantaged his style. It was slow, it was quiet, but it was intentional. And it didn't stop there. Hamilton delved into the politics of the garage, the way team radio messages were filtered, how technical feedback loops began excluding his longtime race engineer from critical meetings, how strategic calls during qualifying became reactive rather than proactive when it came to him. There were even moments, he said, when he learned about upgrades not from his team, but from the paddock rumor mill, whispers from rival engineers who seemed better informed than he was. The implication wasn't just favoritism. It was strategic realignment. Mercedes, he believed, had already made their choice. And it wasn't him. When he turned his attention to Toto Wolff, the room became even more tense. Hamilton didn't raise his voice, but the weight behind his words deepened. He recalled private meetings where he had expressed concerns, only to be met with vague assurances and empty commitments. He recounted moments when Toto had promised full transparency, then watched as critical decisions were made without his knowledge. It wasn't about professional disagreement, it was about broken trust. Not once, but over and over again. When he spoke of the years he gave to the team, his image, his influence, his relentless drive, there was no ego in his tone. Only a sense of wounded dignity. He reminded them that he had always fought for them, on and off the track. That when Mercedes was under pressure, he had been their shield. And now, when he needed them to show up for him, they had vanished behind a wall of corporate protocol and selective accountability. No one interrupted. No one dared. A few engineers looked down at the table. Others sat frozen, unable to process the sheer magnitude of what was unfolding. It wasn't just a driver venting, it was a dismantling of an entire culture that had quietly shifted while pretending to stand still. Hamilton wasn't asking for validation. He wasn't seeking apologies. He was drawing a line. Those who heard him speak say he didn't threaten to leave, didn't mention contracts or negotiations. He didn't need to. The message was unmistakably clear. This chapter had ended. Whatever came next would be on his terms, not theirs. When he finally stood up, the room remained silent. He didn't look back. He didn't wait for responses. He walked out with the same quiet fire that had built inside him all season. And as the doors closed behind him, those left behind were forced to sit with the weight of what they had just witnessed. A driver no longer willing to be a passenger in a machine that had slowly turned against him. He didn't just reclaim his voice. He redefined the conversation. He leaned in with the kind of intensity that silences even the most cynical audience. What followed wasn't a speech, it was an emotional release, the kind that had clearly been boiling under the surface for months, maybe years. He began by peeling back the layers on what he called a systematic erosion of performance integrity, alleging that, unbeknownst to him, his car's most critical energy deployment systems were being modified at key moments during qualifying sessions. Specifically, he referenced 5 high-stakes Saturday sessions in the 2023 season and 3 additional instances in early 2024 when his hybrid deployment mode, a crucial function in extracting maximum pace on a single lap, was quietly restricted during his final runs. He explained that what made these interventions so insidious was their precision. They didn't sabotage the entire session, just the moments that mattered most. The final lap when tire temperatures peaked and track evolution offered the greatest gains. The official explanation, whenever he raised concerns, was always the same: thermal regulation protocols. It was presented as a necessary safeguard, a preventative measure to avoid overheating components. But Hamilton's instincts, sharpened over more than a decade at the highest level, told him something wasn't adding up. The laps felt inexplicably dull, sluggish, not enough to raise alarms on telemetry, but enough to miss pole by fractions. He knew what the car should be doing, and it wasn't doing it. It was only months later, through an anonymous source within the team's power unit division, that Hamilton received confirmation. A quiet message, a shared folder, and hidden within it, encrypted control logs showing that performance-reducing commands were remotely deployed through a secure pathway that bypassed all race-facing systems, including his engineer. These encrypted orders were invisible in the normal operating logs and activated only under very specific parameters that aligned precisely with his final push laps. There were no overheating warnings, no temperature spikes, no valid technical justification. Just code written to appear benign, yet deadly to lap time. The betrayal stung more because it had been hidden behind smiles, team briefings, and scripted messages of unity. They looked me in the eye in those post-session debriefs, congratulated me for getting the most out of the car, while knowing damn well they dialed it back before I left the garage, he said, eyes narrowing. I wasn't competing on equal ground, I was being handled. But that wasn't the full weight of what he carried. What came next was more intimate, more cutting. A memory of a closed-door conversation with team principal Toto Wolff that occurred in the quiet shadows of the Monaco paddock, after a particularly confusing weekend where nothing on the track reflected what the simulator had shown. Hamilton had been vocal, if cautious, about his belief that his setups were being altered without alignment to his simulator work. He had noticed consistent differences, changes to ride height, damping profiles, aerodynamic balance, that made the car behave unpredictably. Monaco was the tipping point. When he brought this to Wolff, hoping for dialogue, for some acknowledgement that something wasn't right, the response he got floored him. Wolff, he claimed, didn't deny it. He didn't even pretend to investigate. Instead, he leaned back and said, with a tone that Hamilton couldn't forget, "Maybe you're not the same driver anymore. Maybe this sport isn't what it used to be, for any of us." That wasn't advice. It wasn't reflection. It was, in Hamilton's view, a coded message. The era of support, of loyalty, of building the team around him, that chapter was being closed. The subtext was clear. The team was looking beyond him. That night, Hamilton formally requested an internal audit, a full report comparing his simulator outputs to actual setup deployments from the last several Grands Prix. The data was promised. It never arrived. Follow-ups were ignored. Eventually, the issue was dismissed under the pretense of data reconciliation delays. But even that, as disturbing as it was, couldn't prepare the room for the next segment of his revelation, the unthinkable violation of his personal image and voice. He revealed that Mercedes' commercial division had been executing campaigns using his likeness without approval, bypassing the clauses in his contract that required his direct consent for all promotional use. It started subtly, social media posts quoting him out of context, edited video clips with altered subtitles. But it escalated quickly. He showed screenshots of digital banners running in emerging markets, especially in Southeast Asia, where his face appeared beside slogans he'd never spoken, endorsing products he would never support. Some campaigns tied his name to oil companies with controversial extraction practices, entities he had openly criticized in the past. The audience gasped when he played a voiceover from one such campaign. It sounded unmistakably like Hamilton, urging customers to embrace the next generation of combustion. But it wasn't him, it was an AI-generated clone of his voice. The silence in the room was deafening. He let it sit for a moment before speaking. "They didn't just co-opt my voice. They simulated me. They built a version of Lewis Hamilton that they could mold, program, and deploy to say whatever served their strategy, without my knowledge, without my soul." He wasn't just talking about stolen IP, he was talking about identity theft at the highest level. A digital puppet constructed from recordings, interviews, and telemetry data to replicate his tone, vocabulary, emotional cadence, everything that made him uniquely himself. And it wasn't being used to educate or inspire, it was being weaponized to sell, to mislead, to dilute. He described feeling like a product rather than a person, a brand mascot repurposed for campaigns he didn't even know existed. And when he confronted the team, he was met not with remorse, but corporate silence. PR spin. Legal hedging. "We were testing engagement metrics," one executive allegedly told him, as though that justified turning his voice into a marketing tool without approval. He ended not with anger, but with something colder, disillusionment. "You give your life to this team. You sacrifice birthdays, relationships, sanity. You fight through crashes, you mentor junior drivers, you take the heat when things go wrong. And one day, you wake up and realize the team you bled for created a synthetic version of you that's easier to control, easier to profit from, easier to silence." And they did it with a smile. After the 2024 Japanese Grand Prix, a seismic rift opened between Lewis Hamilton and the Mercedes team, one that had been brewing quietly beneath the surface but finally erupted in a moment of raw confrontation that would set the course for a dramatic and irreversible collapse in trust. Hamilton, visibly incensed and carrying an overwhelming sense of betrayal, stormed into the hospitality suite, an area once synonymous with comfort, unity, and strategic camaraderie, and made a beeline toward Toto Wolff, the man he had once trusted with his career, his reputation, and his aspirations for immortality in Formula One. In his hand, he held a tablet pulsing with damning data, evidence he believed could no longer be ignored. He didn't toss it lightly, he planted it down with conviction, in front of everyone, demanding attention. Displayed on the screen were intricate telemetry reports, internal team communications, and photographic evidence proving beyond reasonable doubt that George Russell had been equipped with a newly enhanced rear wing, one that was initially developed and optimized for Hamilton's car. According to Hamilton, this wasn't an error, a miscommunication, or a logistical mix-up. This was a deliberate decision, executed behind closed doors without his consent or knowledge. What pierced deeper than the betrayal itself was Wolff's reaction, his composure, his dispassion, his readiness. The team principal didn't flinch, didn't panic, didn't offer an apology or a justification. Instead, he leaned back, calm and almost rehearsed, and uttered words that Hamilton said would echo in his mind long after the season ended. "We need to prepare for the future. You're not part of it anymore." That sentence, clinical and cold, was a turning point. From that moment forward, Hamilton later revealed, he no longer viewed Mercedes as the institution he had once given everything for. Though he continued to wear the logo, drive the car, and play the part in front of cameras, his spirit had already left the garage. The emotional bond had been severed. The loyalty had died. And what followed, in his account, was something far darker than anyone outside the team could have imagined. In the weeks that followed, Hamilton described an atmosphere that shifted from competitive unity to cold experimentation. According to him, the final races of the 2024 calendar were marred not only by strategic confusion, but by an insidious campaign to repurpose his role within the team. He alleged that his car was repeatedly fitted with components that hadn't passed the standard vetting process, experimental parts that weren't approved by the technical board or subjected to the usual durability tests. During the Mexico Grand Prix, he reported an unrelenting low-frequency vibration coursing through the chassis, something his team brushed off as minor oscillations. But to Hamilton, it wasn't just a sensation, it was a message. After the race, when he demanded a teardown inspection, he was told the floor panel in question had been lost in transit. That same part, he would later learn through internal whispers and off-the-record admissions, was a prototype being developed for the 2025 package, intended to measure airflow disruption and drag under extreme speed scenarios. And it had been installed on his car without his authorization. "I became an unwilling beta tester," he said. "I wasn't a competitor anymore, I was a data mule, a dispensable asset." The revelation exploded across the Formula One community like a detonation in a powder keg. It started as whispers, a few cryptic lines on anonymous forums, and rapidly transformed into a global investigation fueled by fan obsession and journalistic determination. Within days, footage from race broadcasts was dissected frame by frame. Audio from team radios was looped and transcribed. Strategy sheets were leaked. A spreadsheet compiled by a data analyst on Reddit went viral. It charted every strategic undercut opportunity over 2 seasons and showed an unmistakable pattern. George Russell received the optimal undercut far more often than Hamilton, particularly in high-stakes races where tire degradation was critical. The numbers told a story no press release could refute. It wasn't just about rear wings or floor panels. It was about a consistent, calculated shift in favor. Radio transmissions, once considered routine, were reinterpreted with a new lens. Hamilton's questions were often met with vague, dismissive answers, while Russell was provided with real-time updates, tire delta projections, and overtaking simulations. Journalists began to question why Hamilton's pit stops had longer average durations in certain races or why his tire compounds seemed to degrade disproportionately. Slow-motion analysis showed Hamilton's car bottoming out more aggressively on circuits with high downforce demands, perhaps a symptom of the untested floor component. The fans turned into investigators. They didn't just ask questions, they demanded accountability. Mercedes' response only fueled the fire. The team issued a brief, soulless communiqué expressing appreciation for Hamilton's contributions and firmly denying any action that would compromise the values of competitive integrity. The statement avoided specifics, carefully dodged references to the wing discrepancy, ignored the prototype floor entirely, and offered no clarification on strategy favoritism. It was a calculated, legal-safe blanket statement that did nothing to extinguish the blaze. Meanwhile, Toto Wolff vanished from public commentary. He was approached at a celebrity fundraiser in Vienna, where reporters attempted to probe the controversy. He simply smiled and said, "Lewis has his truth. We have ours," and walked away, leaving the press and the world staring into a void of ambiguity. For Hamilton, it wasn't just about performance or podiums, it was about identity. You dedicate your life to a machine, to a crest, to a group of engineers, strategists, designers. You become part of the organism, he said in a private recording that was later leaked to a European news outlet. And when they decide you've expired, they erase you from the future like a corrupted file. Quietly. Without ceremony. Without dignity. His tone wasn't bitter. It was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes not from defeat, but from realization that even after redefining an era, you're still dispensable in the eyes of progress. What Hamilton felt wasn't just abandonment, it was dehumanization. And for millions of fans who had watched his career with awe and reverence, that sentiment hit harder than any lost championship. The ripple effect spread across the paddock. Teams whispered about the breakdown behind closed doors. Engineers traded glances. Former teammates dropped cryptic tweets. Rival principals offered veiled support in interviews, alluding to internal fractures at Mercedes and expressing sympathy for those put in difficult political positions. The drama shifted from track to backstage. Sponsors asked questions. Broadcasters requested interviews that were consistently denied. Sky Sports aired a special segment titled Behind the Curtain, dissecting every strategy call from Singapore to Abu Dhabi. Even Netflix's Drive to Survive altered its editorial focus mid-season, shifting their narrative arc to spotlight the unraveling of a dynasty. George Russell remained mostly silent, offering vague comments about team dynamics evolving and everyone playing their part. But his silence spoke volumes. His upward trajectory was no longer seen as organic, but as institutionally engineered. He became, unfairly or not, a symbol of Mercedes' new era, an era built not on shared legacy, but calculated succession. Fans were divided. Some blamed Russell. Others blamed the system. But all agreed, something fundamental had changed. Hamilton didn't need to say more. The damage was done. The facade was shattered. And though he finished the season in the same seat, under the same branding, with the same mechanics standing by, it was no longer his team. The silver arrows that once flew on wings of unity were now just tools of transition. And he, once the heart of the machine, was merely a ghost haunting its corridors. George Russell, long regarded as the polished, composed, and diplomatic face of Mercedes' future, has remained publicly mute in the wake of Lewis Hamilton's bombshell revelations. Yet behind closed doors, the story is starkly different. Sources embedded deep within the team have described Russell as visibly unsettled, his calm shattered, his confidence shaken. Words like rattled, disturbed, and even haunted have been used by those who've interacted with him in recent days. Technicians and team members report seeing him pacing the garage, avoiding eye contact, visibly burdened by an awareness that seems to have hit him with brutal force. One engineer claimed he overheard Russell, barely audible, say, "Had I known what they were doing to him, I would have intervened." Whether those words are genuine or simply an attempt to reconcile his inaction with the storm around him remains a matter of speculation. What is no longer uncertain is the deafening vacuum left by his refusal to publicly acknowledge the chaos unfolding within the very organization that was supposed to represent excellence, fairness, and unity. While Russell retreats into silence, Hamilton has stepped into a different role entirely. No longer the quiet warrior, no longer the corporate ambassador towing the party line, he's transformed into something altogether more powerful, a disruptor with a cause. In a speech that felt less like a retirement message and more like a manifesto, Hamilton laid bare the intricacies of betrayal, manipulation, and internal sabotage that he says corroded his final years at Mercedes. Calm but searing, his delivery left no room for misinterpretation. He came with proof, not vague anecdotes, but cold, hard artifacts. Screenshots, email chains, audio recordings, meetings logged, conversations transcribed. He's not wielding these artifacts like weapons of vengeance. He's laying them out like evidence in a trial where the court is public opinion and the jury spans generations of drivers, fans, and future stars. Hamilton was explicit in his intent. This isn't about grudges or vendettas. It's about lifting the curtain, exposing a system that can raise you up as a symbol of dominance only to discard you once you've served your purpose. "They built a monument with me as the cornerstone," he said, voice steady but with unmistakable pain beneath the surface. "And then they tried to dismantle it, methodically, silently. But the truth will outlive the lies. And so will I." Those words didn't just echo in the room, they detonated across the motorsport world. Every paddock, every boardroom, every broadcast studio. Within hours, the landscape began to shift. Corporate sponsors who had long kept close ties with Mercedes began placing quiet calls to Ferrari, not in loud announcements but in discreet, deliberate inquiries. "What does it mean to stand beside Lewis now?" became the question whispered in executive lounges and marketing summits. The allure of aligning with someone who's no longer just a champion, but a voice for change has shifted the equation. Inside Maranello, the home of Ferrari, the atmosphere is tense but electric. Executives, engineers, and strategists are now grappling with the reality that they aren't just onboarding a fast driver. They're aligning themselves with a catalyst, one who may reshape not only their brand but the entire ethos of Formula One. According to an insider close to Ferrari's top brass, the revelations prompted a flurry of meetings and internal memos. This is no longer about performance metrics or telemetry charts, the source disclosed. If even a fraction of what he said is accurate, we're no longer dealing with just a legend, we're dealing with a revolutionary. And we must be ready for that weight. That weight is already pressing heavily across the paddock, particularly at Mercedes, where the usual calm has been replaced by frantic internal messaging, hastily called meetings, and an eerie sense that something irreparable has been broken. The brand that once symbolized dominance and pristine professionalism now finds itself grappling with shadows it can't seem to outrun. And while Mercedes maintains a stony silence, no statements, no rebuttals, no clarifications, Hamilton is doing the opposite. He's speaking in carefully chosen terms, each one measured for impact, each revelation delivered with surgical precision. He isn't shouting. He doesn't need to. The information speaks for itself. The documents, the conversations, the patterns of behavior, they form a mosaic that paints a damning portrait. He's not accusing one person. He's illuminating a culture. One that allowed, even encouraged, his systematic erasure once the cameras weren't watching. The emotional undercurrent is palpable. This isn't just professional disappointment, it's personal disillusionment. Years spent building a dynasty, sacrificing body and mind for victories that defined an era, only to be slowly edged out of the narrative. He was the architect of greatness, but when the spotlight shifted, the scaffolding was pulled away, leaving him exposed, diminished, isolated. Yet instead of retreating quietly, he's choosing transparency over diplomacy. And that choice is shaking the sport to its core. Russell, now carrying the mantle of team leadership at Mercedes, is under a microscope. His every expression, every answer, every public appearance is dissected. Fans are questioning his role, his awareness, his integrity. Did he look the other way? Was he a pawn, or was he protected while Hamilton was scapegoated? These questions won't vanish, no matter how many podiums he climbs or pole positions he secures. His career now exists under a long shadow, one that wasn't there before, but may never lift. And as for Hamilton, he's no longer playing by the sport's unwritten rules. He's rewriting them, line by line, not just with speed, but with words, with receipts, with resolve. Every revelation is another match thrown onto the bridge behind him, not just to ensure he never walks it again, but so that no one who dares cross it in the future forgets the price that was paid. What he's doing now isn't simply walking away. It's liberation. And not just for himself, but potentially for an entire generation of drivers and fans who are watching this unfold in real time. He's demonstrating that silence is not the only option. That dignity isn't found in complacency, but in confrontation. That legends don't fade quietly. They speak, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it is. Hamilton has taken control of his story. And in doing so, he's forced the entire world of motorsport to reconsider its own.